To start a nearly 1,000-mile bicycle ride circling Lake Huron, my son Alex and I packed up my truck and set out early in the morning to make our way to Point Edward, Ontario. I needed his help to cross the St. Clair River by way of the Blue Water Bridge, which does not allow bicycles. Once he dropped me off, he would spend the first 3 nights with me, doing his own search for fishing spots during the day. I planned to complete this journey over 16 days, camping when I could. For my ride through Ontario, I pulled from portions of the Great Lakes Waterfront Trail, a 3,600-kilometer route along the Canadian shores of the Great Lakes region. I also pulled from the Great Northern Bikepacking route, which, as the name suggests, provides a more off-road-centric riding experience. Links to these resources for my trip, including these routes, GPS of my route, places I stayed and ate, and some of the gear I used, are in the description of this video. This would be my first time cycling Lake Huron by bike, which brought with it excitement, anxiousness, anticipation that comes with riding a new journey that just can't be matched. Questions such as whether I plan the best route, what will the surface and weather be like, how will the climbs be, will there be resources along the ride, what will I see, and what will the inevitable problems and mechanicals be. A challenge to take on, trusting that I would make it through and trusting that difficult times would make good stories. I would start the first day riding about 75 miles along the coast from Point Edward to Bayfield. It would be a hot day with a harsh sun on open roads, but with a nice tailwind. There was a nice series of trails out of Point Edward, some along the lake, some separated from the lake. In fact, while there was a good bit of road riding to make my way around Lake Huron, there was a surprisingly good number of miles on trails as well. During the first couple days of riding, my route followed Route 21 for several sections. Many times Route 21 was just fine with wide shoulders, but other times there was less shoulder and heavier traffic. I made some adjustments to the GPS file in the description of this video to avoid those sections. I rode through Kettle Point, a First Nation reserve officially known as the Chippewas of Kettle and Stony Point, and I enjoyed the gravel roads and looking over the calm lake. Although I should have avoided more of Route 21 than I did, this first day provided a great mix of trails, country roads, and lake views. The surfaces were smooth, my midnight special operated perfectly, the drivers were courteous, and Ontario revealed itself. There are many windmills in Ontario, certainly more in Ohio where I'm from, reportedly providing more than 6% of Canada's energy. I pedaled into Bayfield, a nice small town on the lake, where I would meet up with Alex. We would stay at the Ashwood Inn for the night, getting dinner at Olio, an Italian restaurant in Bayfield. It was a good day of riding and hopefully a good sign for the rest of the ride. I headed out on the second day, originally planning to ride 61 miles from Bayfield to the Inverhuron Provincial Park north of Kincardine. However, I made some last-minute adjustments to the route, adding another 11 miles to avoid more of Route 21. The day started with a 13-mile ride to Goderich, where I would meet Alex for breakfast and coffee at the Blue Water restaurant. The route took me along some country roads to get there. The weather was already hot, very hot, 88 degrees. Breakfast at the Blue Water was good, even if they did not have strong feelings about turning the air conditioning on. I stopped at the beaches in Goderich to find a magically clear blue lake. A gravel trail provided my way north, catching up with Alex on his hunt for fishing spots. At an overlook, I looked back at the bridges I had crossed and was reminded of the overlook at the Eastern Continental Divide on the Gap. The gravel trails eventually gave way to scenic country roads, old churches, barns, cattle, even some Amish people. In fact, there were quite a bit of Amish people along the northeastern corner of the lake, more than I expected. I have read that there are 21 Amish communities scattered in southern Ontario. I stopped at Lucknow for some fluids. The challenge on the second day was the heat, which was as much of a drain as a headwind or a climb. On the open roads, it can make breathing more labored, as though you're riding in a soup instead of flying. In Ripley, I took advantage of a seat in the shade of a town gazebo to cool off before making my way another 7 miles to the coast, where I would ride along the lake to the Inverhuron Provincial Park. It always feels good to me to ride along the water, by the beaches, through the lake towns. The park was great, even if it was located next to a large nuclear power facility, as well as a nice spot for camping. It was just a brief walk to the water, the sun, and the waves. It was by this third day that I realized I had planned too much mileage for the first 3 days, as this was to be a 96-mile ride to the Cypress Lake campground east of Tobermory. I like to plan about 60-mile days, but for some forgotten reason, these first 3 days were planned to be 2 days of over 70 miles and a third near a century. I would definitely add an additional day of riding here. The weather was forecast to be a high of 89 again, though it was overcast and that helped. A nice tailwind helped too, and the lake was encouraging. The ride along the coast to Southampton was amazing and made up for the heat and distance with stunning views of the lake and shores. I met up with Alex at the Lighthouse restaurant in Southampton for lunch. It was good to get some cold drinks. I then rode along the lake, with it sometimes hiding behind dunes, but with its smell and sounds always close. A nice thing about following the lake is that there are frequent parks, most with benches and many with fountains. After arriving at the Cypress Lake campground in the Bruce Peninsula National Park, we set up camp, had a nice meal of steak and potatoes, and enjoyed the campfire while I looked into my ferry ride for the next day. The fourth day started with a cool breeze in the morning, as Alex drove me the 8 miles to the ferry after realizing I needed to be there an hour before it departed. I saw a storm that was coming, but the bulk of it passed over during the ferry ride, with me leaving behind Alex as he headed back home. When I exited the ferry to make my 52 miles to Little Current, it became clear that the storms had not entirely passed over. I had leaned toward the Great Northern Bikepacking route instead of the Great Lakes Waterfront Trail for this day of riding, which took me through some more gravel, much of it soaked from the heavy rain. I was making my way through it and up and over it until I came to a road that was closed at a river crossing. There was no way around, so I backtracked some miles for a workaround, only to find the backup road was closed with a no trespassing sign. I gave in and let the Garmin do the rerouting, which worked, though favoring Route 6. It was busier than I would have liked, but not too busy, and it had very wide shoulders. The clouds and rain gave way to blue skies as I drove through farmlands and country, despite being on an island. At 10 Mile Point, I looked over the trees, the hills, and the lake. It was then smooth riding into Little Current, where I would stay at the Hawberry Motel and get a good dinner at Elliot's restaurant. The fifth day, with a 51-mile ride to Massey, started much cooler with a high of 72. I stopped down to see the Little Current swing bridge before riding over it. Built in 1913 as a rail bridge, it was converted to allow road traffic in 1946. However, there are plans to replace it with another swing bridge. This day of riding would include winding, rolling hills with more views of lakes and interesting terrains than I had seen so far on this journey. I was often surrounded by peaceful water. Although much of the riding was on roads, the shoulders were wide and the traffic was not heavy. Some of the hills tested my old legs and heart, but I made it up all of them, even if slow. Only one had gradients that reached 9 to 12% according to Garmin, but the worst of that didn't last long. I made it to Espanola to replenish my water bottles and add some fuel to my body, after which the route changed to country roads with hardly a car. It did make me wonder whether I had sufficiently researched the bear populations. Once I made it to Massey, a bridge crossing the river was under construction and a sign made it clear that they did not want cyclists to cross it. Instead, there was a number for a shuttle that I called. A friendly driver quickly appeared and offered to just follow me as I crossed, which I did without issue. While the Chute's Provincial Park did not offer drinks or snacks for sale, there was a good shower and laundry facilities, both of which I took advantage of. I also took a walk on a nearby trail, only to find a waterfall, which is a great way to end a day. At camp, I used one of my freeze-dried camping meals and relaxed as I watched rain coming into the radar for the next day. There would be no escape from the rain during the 73-mile ride to Iron Bridge on the 6th day. I rode to the Little Brew Cafe in Massey for a great cup of coffee and breakfast sandwich before stocking up with fluids for the day. Much of this ride would be along a river, including paved and gravel roads. The rain would exponentially increase as the day went on. You might notice that I had installed aero bars for this ride, which I have done simply to add another comfortable position for riding. While I enjoy them, I don't think I'll use them for the next trip. I did not feel I used them enough to justify the trade-offs, such as the interference with me being able to access my front bag and causing a more downward-looking view during the ride. As I came into Blind River, it was a full-blown downpour, the tipping point when I realized it just wasn't possible to get any more soaked than I already was. But I pedaled through, as you do when you're out on your own. The rain finally let up at the end of the day in Iron Bridge, where I rode to the Red Top Motor Inn, a retro motel that was a great reward for the day of riding. The owners were polite and helpful. I love motels with a communal aspect of the courtyard type area, people sitting outside their rooms in lawn chairs, heading to the on-site restaurant for meals. It is something no big box hotel can provide. I had a nice meal of potato fritters and butter chicken before getting a night's rest. On the 7th day, I woke to the sound of heavy rain, so I stayed in bed. By the time I made my hotel room coffee and looked outside, the rain had left and the sun had come out. With it being a shorter day of riding, 42 miles to Bruce Mines, I was not in a rush. There would be chances of rain throughout the day, but it wasn't going to be a downpour like the previous day. The forecast was for a high of 66, which is just about a perfect day of riding when dry. This day started primarily with gravel country roads, Amish and horses and their buggies sharing the roads. There was a strong breeze today, coming from the south, so primarily a crosswind. The lower temps, rustic homes and farms and cattle all contributed to a great day of riding. I detoured into Thessalon, hoping for a nice lunch. There was not much open though, so instead I toured the city and grabbed drinks and a sandwich from a local grocery store. I rejoined the cows on my way to Bruce Mines, where I had hoped to camp. Reservations needed to be made by telephone, and after not receiving a call back after a few attempts, I made a reservation at the Bavarian Inn. It was also a rustic motel, though the owner was working hard to modernize the rooms. is also right on the lake, which was just about perfect. I grabbed a dinner at the on-site restaurant as well. The 48-mile ride on the 8th day into Sault Ste. Marie was through beautiful weather, a high of 76 and sunny with just a gentle breeze. The ride started with gravel country roads through another section where I had leaned towards the Great Northern Bikepacking route. This included rolling hills on my way to Echo Bay. At some points it was like a roller coaster, though I was carrying my luggage on that roller coaster. There was an amazing area to stop at Diamond Lake with crystal clear water. The roads were almost completely empty, except for me and the sound of the breeze and the birds. After Echo Bay, it was smooth and mostly downhill. It was nice to come into Sault Ste. Marie, to see the houses and city streets, but mainly to rejoin the lake on my left, where I had the opportunity to pull up to it and to see the welcoming blue expanse. It was the perfect reward for riding the Canadian side of the lake. It made me a little sad to know my ride around Lake Huron was about half over and that I would be leaving Canada tomorrow. There was still plenty of a journey ahead for sure. After decompressing and cleaning up, I searched for restaurants in the area. I inadvertently chose the least Canadian place to eat, Montana's Barbecue and Grill. Or maybe I'm wrong, there were at least 2 other barbecue places in town. It was close, had Proteins beer, and it was on the water. It would do just fine. To start my 57-mile ride to Straits State Park on the 9th day, I woke up early and grabbed a hotel breakfast, including coffee, a bagel, and a silly putty omelet. The main event during the 9th day would be the crossing of the St. Mary's River by way of the Sault Ste. Marie International Bridge to make my way back to the U.S. This bridge also separated Lakes Huron and Michigan, which I am told are technically one lake due to sharing the same water level. There is not a sidewalk, bike lane, or much of a shoulder for crossing the bridge by bike. The traffic wasn't too heavy though, although there was a long climb to start my way over the bridge. I wish I would have done better catching views over the side, but there wasn't a place to stop, and my attention was more on getting safely across than adjusting my camera. Once across, I stopped at customs where there were no issues. I did come to a toll where they charged $2.10. Once in Michigan, much of the riding was away from the lake until I neared St. Martin Bay. The roads had traffic, but not heavy traffic, and there was enough of a shoulder to feel safe. I stopped in Rudyard to replenish my liquids and granola bars. I had about 25 miles to go to get near camp. I planned to stop in town in St. Ignace first to get something to eat and maybe check in with one of the ferries to talk about the process of getting across the next day. You can't cross the 5-mile Mackinac Bridge by bike, so I planned to take a ferry to Mackinac Island and then over to Mackinaw City. As I came into St. Ignace, I saw many little hotels open, but many closed and a few new ones being built. I stopped at Shepler's Ferry to verify all would be good for tomorrow. I then made my way through town to get to Straits State Park. I found a perfect camp spot, a little wooded with a lake just through the trees and a good hammock hanging spot. The hammock does wonders for my feet and legs, and also my mind. The weather was cool and cloudy, nice for the 58-mile ride to Hoeft State Park on the 10th day of this journey. I rode to the ferry before 10, which put me on the 10:30 ferry. This one also did a tour underneath the Mackinac Bridge on its way to Mackinac Island. The wind was brisk on the ferry. The 5-mile Mackinac Bridge opened in 1957 and is the longest suspension bridge in the Western Hemisphere. Once I arrived at Mackinac Island, I got right in the lane to take the 11:30 ferry to Mackinaw City. It wasn't a long wait, and the warm sun felt good after the chilly ferry ride. Once I arrived in the touristy Mackinaw City, I finally got my breakfast at Pancake Chef, a breakfast buffet. Afterward, I rode a great gravel trail that followed near Route 23 for several miles. When I did come back to the road, it wasn't too busy. It took me through small towns and close to the lake, where there were several scenic spots with picnic tables. The route was close to the lake the whole day. Once I got near Hoeft State Park, north of Rogers City, there was another nice separated path. I arrived as they were closing, but the worker was friendly and agreed to check me in.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can get that thing real quick. Okay.
There were not many restaurants on my way to camp, so after setting up camp and cleaning up, I opted for another freeze-dried dinner. It was chilly by this time, in the 60s, with a breeze off the lake. The 11th day was another cool one, with a high of 65 and sunny. This made for a great 56-mile ride. There was a wonderful trail from camp to Rogers City, smooth through woods and along the lake. Riding just can't get much better than this. I stopped in Rogers City to get some more food and electrolyte packets. On the way out, I found my route had me riding through a gated-off quarry, so I backtracked to some other busier roads where I made my way to the Rogers City Trail. but it was closed, apparently due to a bridge being out.
What the f***?
That kept me on the busy roads until I finally made it to the Northeastern State Trail in Posen. This provided miles of excellent riding on a rail-to-trail. Gravel, wind, birds, and deer. The weather was perfect too. Not cold, but not breaking much of a sweat either. When I came into Alpena, the main drag was on a busier road that made me comfortable, so I cut down some side streets until I came to the Black Sheep pub for an early dinner. After following some streets out of town, the last 10 miles of riding were on gravel country roads, littered with potholes, but an adventure on back roads. I pulled into the campground where self-registration with payment happened at a kiosk. I then chose my site. Those along the beach were taken, but I could still see the lake from my site, and luckily there were trees for my hammock. There were no showers, so I'd be looking forward to that and laundry at the hotel the following day. For the 12th day of this journey, I would ride 62 miles to Tawas City. There was a high of 69, primarily overcast with a headwind of 12 to 15 miles an hour. More importantly, this day started with my best meal of the trip, the Blue Ox breakfast at Connie's Cafe and Deli. The day went well, with my route taking me on as many side streets as possible to avoid Route 23, though it had a wide shoulder too. Although some of the riding took me away from the coast, it was still good riding. A light sprinkle did come in, which would remain with me much of the rest of the day. I tried a light wind jacket for a while for warmth and to stay dry, but as usual I then became more wet if I had not worn it at all, so I took it off. In addition to riding through several small towns, there was some nice riding along the coast. Though to get the full experience of the lake, stops at the coastal parks were the way to go. Many of the towns were touristy, including Tawas, where I would spend the night. There were okay sidewalks to get off of the busier roads. I stayed at the Crow's Nest Inn, another old-school motel. However, the Days Inn next door was associated and provided access to its pool, laundry facilities, and morning breakfast. I ordered pizza for dinner from G's Pizzeria, and it hit the spot. The 65-mile ride to Bay City State Park on the 13th day would be through 83-degree weather and a slight headwind. route was a mixed bag, sometimes near the lake and sometimes not. Trails, gravel roads, country roads, and also Route 23. It was all great riding, primarily empty roads among the fields and farms. I noticed this path gradually got more rustic the further I rode. More small trees along it. It eventually dead-ended at somebody's yard, so I backtracked and found another alternate route to camp. The camp was nice, though more open with fewer trees than I generally like. The restrooms and showers were spotless and nearby. Although it was warm when I first arrived, that wind that had been holding me back during the day cooled the campsite. The 14th day, a ride originally planned to the Oak Beach County Park, would be about 67 miles and a bit chilly. After getting breakfast at Bob Evans, I would continue along up the Thumb of Michigan. There were several portions of this ride on trails. Though many sections through the country too. I originally planned to stay at the Oak Beach County Park, but after discovering we would be packed in like sardines among campers, we backtracked to the Sleeper State Park, which was a good one. My son Alex came up to spend the last 2 nights camping with me. He also brought some tools for me to check out my bike and took my bags off my hands for riding through the last couple days. Alex made steak sandwiches as we watched and heard a little girl doing laps around the park with her bike and training wheels. I think she rode more that evening than I did the entire trip. A short walk to the beach and a nice campfire provided a wonderful end to the day. I was greeted with perfect weather of 72 degrees for the 15th day to make my way 48 miles to the Wagener County Park for my last night of camping. This would be close to Lake Huron and its coast for most of the day. The lake was within view most of the ride, with many places to stop and rest and to get a closer look. I rode 13 miles to Port Austin to meet up with Alex for breakfast, though the restaurant had moved on to lunch by the time we arrived. I got back on the road, enjoying a smooth ride, checking out what I could along the lake. The small towns were not only interesting to ride through, but they often provided places to stop and refresh my drinks too. Bicycle touring forces one to live in the present, despite some looking ahead at the weather. The focus becomes simple: the beauty, the breathing, the trail, the pedaling, setting up camp, getting food and water. More basic and immediate needs and rewards, more akin to my rhythm of life. I pulled into Harbor Beach for a rest, thinking I might find Alex. He was there, but on a separate pier fishing. It wasn't much further to the Wagener State Park, which Alex would beat me to. We were right on the lake, a perfect spot for setting up camp. After cleaning up, we did make a short ride to the Williams Inn for a great dinner, where I got a $21 porterhouse that came with a salad and soup bar. It was what I consider an old-school restaurant, done exceptionally well. Back at camp, we relaxed. He fished some more, and I relaxed some more. My 16th and final day of my journey around Lake Huron would take me 53 miles through nice sunny weather. The riding was smooth along Route 25, which continued to have a wide shoulder. It took me past parks, resorts, cabins, through towns, and often with a view of the lake. As I got closer to Port Huron, the destination, both the traffic and wind increased, but I pushed through. This had been quite the ride. A good distance, a good number of days. I was ready to rest though, at least my legs were. As is common, I think, I was both not ready for this journey to come to an end, yet also ready for it to come to an end. The destination was a great way to end the trip, allowing me to reach the lake and look out across the water to see Point Edward, where I had started the ride just 16 days prior. I took it in, thinking about it, having enjoyed this journey immensely.